When it comes to horror, movies being based on true events or ghost stories isn't really that uncommon. But what about games? When was the last time you played a video game based off of a ghost story from the real world? If you've already played the game we're talking about today, maybe it was pretty recently, inspired by a ghost story that takes place in Wales and made by Wales Interactive. Here is my review of Maid of Sker for the Nintendo Switch. Maid of Sker's story takes place in 1898, influenced by the ghost tale of the Sker House. To give you a little backstory, the Sker House tale is around Elizabeth Williams, a woman who falls in love with a poor harpist named Thomas. Not approving of their relationship, Elizabeth's father locks her away in the house. And from here, the story goes a few different ways, but in the end, be it by starving herself or from a broken heart, Elizabeth ends up dying. And to this very day, some say you can see her ghostly apparition looking out from the attic of the house, along with a strange mist and the sound of rustling chains in that very attic. Now, as far as the game goes, it didn't really take that much from the ghost story outside of just the atmosphere, location, and some of the characters. It does have some nice and subtle references to the tale itself, from Thomas and Elizabeth to the family dog that supposedly scared the real Thomas away when he tried to go and save Elizabeth in the real world. But the game's story has Elizabeth Williams writing to Thomas, her fiancé, that she is being forced to sing by her father and trapped in the Sker Hotel. Thomas, the player character, goes after her only to find a very strange and magical song having turned everyone into hostile, deformed monsters. He then has to sneak and fight through Sker Hotel to stop this strange dark power and rescue his fiancée. Despite the game's story not taking that much from the original ghost tale, the game's plot turned out to be pretty interesting. Once you start diving into the backstory of the Williams family, what happened at the hotel, and the source of this dark magical melody, a simple rescue mission turns into something much bigger and more Lovecraftian in design. When it comes to gameplay, Maid of Sker is a first-person survival horror game with stealth elements. Main progression here has you exploring the Sker Hotel, gathering items as you go into each room and using them to solve puzzles. The way you progress this is also kind of a love letter to older horror games like Resident Evil, with limited areas that you can actually access with locked doors, having to find keys later on, along with having designated save rooms where you're safe from enemies and have little phonographs that you can use to save your progress. But while you're doing this, you also have to avoid enemies in the form of what the game refers to as masked men. This is where the stealth elements come into play. Maid of Sker is big on its sound system. None of the enemies can physically see you, but they can hear everything that you do. You've got a lot of sound management with crouching down, holding your breath for limited amounts of time, and sneaking around enemies and hazards. This sound system is actually a credit to the game, as it works extremely well both for your own management and listening to the sounds enemies make so you know how close they are. But the system also takes away a lot of the scare factor. Outside of the atmosphere and all of the jump scares the game throws at you in little cutscenes, it feels more like it's a stealth game than a horror game. I went very quickly from avoiding enemies and staying dozens of feet away from them to sneaking around them literally inches away, knowing that as long as I was holding my breath, they would never know I was even there. It got to the point where they weren't even scary anymore. It was just, oh, here's another enemy here, let me just crouch down and hold ZR while I casually walk around them to go into the next room. Now, there is one enemy that has heightened senses and does give you that scary game anxiety, but considering the interactions with him are such a small part of the overall game, it doesn't really take you that far out of that stealth game mentality. Speaking of short and small, let's talk about content and length, as you won't really be spending that much time in Sker Hotel. With getting the extra item needed for the good ending, it only took me about 4 hours to get through the game. Considering the map system automatically showing you key items in each room as you go in, I'd say that even those not used to the horror genre could get through the game in no more than 6 hours. Next, let's go into presentation. The game does look visually detailed and pretty, though the Switch version does have a pretty decent amount of blurring. In docked mode it doesn't look that bad, but handheld does raise the blur factor a good bit. When it comes to performance, it stays pretty stable for the most part. There were a few areas, like the library, where it did drop into the 20s here and there, but overall it was a pretty smooth experience. And with all of that out of the way, let's dive into battery life. On the original model, Maid of Sker has a battery range of 2 hours and 43 minutes up to 3 hours and 2 minutes. On the Nintendo Switch Lite, it has a range of 2 hours and 50 minutes up to 3 hours and 38 minutes. And on the Redbox or V2 2019 model, it has a range of 4 hours and 26 minutes up to 5 hours and 24 minutes. In conclusion, Maid of Sker is an interesting horror game inspired by a famous Welsh ghost story. Now on the downside, its enemies make it feel less horror and more stealth, and this combined with the fact that it isn't a lengthy adventure and the handheld blur, bring down an otherwise interesting experience with a great sound system. Reviews to go rates Maid of Sker for the Nintendo Switch a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.